States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So before we get into our presentation,
OMU Commissioners Work Session,
when I ask
4th
for
of
action,
November
we do have one action item. In our water lab, we've got some pending retirements from very experienced technicians. And so we need to go ahead and we've got an internal transfer from the power side to that lab. We'd like to go ahead and approve that because that's important to us to go ahead and get that one moving. So we didn't want to wait a couple weeks for our next meeting. So that's the one action item 1.
With Jason's existing job at gone away.
Yes.
I make a motion to approve.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so on our decommissioning plan, we've been working on this for quite some time. Brad's going to go through in detail where we are. As I said, we're not asking for your action. We're going to lay out for you the different options that we looked at, the cost of those options, the one that we recommend, and kind of the plan moving forward on getting that implemented. As I talked with Tony at the beginning, these options are not inexpensive, but that's the part of the cost of owning and operating a power plant is decommissioning it. So with that, I'll let Brad go through. And before we get to that, though, hey, one more thing. I want to point out that bright, non-blurry new screen up there. So we're 95% complete with our boiler room renovation. Brittany was the project manager. She's done a great job. The blurry screen is gone. We've got a brand new HD TV screen. We also have in the table, if you need power or we need to hook up to our network, we've got that down the table here. So we've got a screen behind so we don't have to crane our heads to look around. The last part of that is we're going to get a new phone that's going to have wireless speakers to get rid of all these cords that we get, at least I get tangled up in. That's coming probably in the next week or so. So I think it's turned out really well, and Brittany did a great job with managing that project. So, and hopefully you want to strain to see Brad's presentation, and it won't be slightly blurry like they have in the past with that 1994 vintage projector. Okay, now Brad.
All right, you ready? All right, so we'll start here at the beginning talking about as far as decommissioning goes. We've put a lot of effort into this. One of the first things that we realized is there's no real standard across the country for what decommissioning means. And if you look, some states have tried to define it. Some states have tried to put some legislation through. I got one example up here. Massachusetts has proposed for their legislation. I won't bore you with reading that, but it's a long, it's a pretty long definition of what they're trying to get through. So we've looked at what decommissioning, as in every situation where a company is decommissioning a facility, they've kind of gone in and made the definition themselves. What does decommissioning mean to them? And we've kind of done the same thing. So we've taken a different look at what are the phases or what are the different potential stages for decommissioning. First and foremost would be simple shutdown and retirement, then following through with environmental remediation, then demolition of the facilities, and even into full site restoration. So we've kind of taken the two extremes that we'll go through in the presentation here. We're looking at potential for retire in place options, which would include isolating the facilities electrically from the utilities, remediating the environmental issues, closing the buildings and then making it as safe as possible from the perimeter standpoint, and ensuring that for an extended period of time, all the way up to full demolition, which would be basically leveling everything, hauling materials off-site, and making it suitable for potential industrial use down the road. As I said a while ago, there are no general regulatory requirements for decommissioning. One of the things that we do have to deal with is a co-combustion residuals regulation, CCR, where they do specify requirements for pond closure. Obviously, in the presentation, we'll talk as to how we plan to comply with those regulations when we shut down Elmer Smith. We'll also talk about removing environmental hazards such as chemicals, fuels, lubricants, and getting those off-site, as well as asbestos removal. Really looking at prevention of future issues and liability with the asbestos removal. And then at the end of the day, we'll balance, we'll do our due diligence in balancing the risk mitigation and along with the decommissioning costs. We did initially hire Burns & McDonnell to help us perform the initial decommissioning study. Obviously, they have vast experience in doing this, and we felt that that would be a good option for us to get at least an understanding of kind of where we are and where we need to go. We asked them to look at 3 specific options, one being the retire in place option, then the second being the retire in place and taking down the stacks all the way up to full demolition. And if you got any questions, feel free to stop me at any time and I'll try to answer them. So we looked at option number 1 with Burns & McDonnell. Was a retire in place. Obviously, this was the lowest cost, lowest effort option. We did include in that the ash pond closure, as well as environmental remediation. We will be, as said a while ago, there's no, that is the requirement that we close the ash ponds. We are looking at doing what we consider to be clean close, which would be remove all the ash from the ponds and get all the CCR materials out of that, as well as removing all solids, liquids, fuels, lubricants. And in their study, they looked at asbestos encapsulation, and we'll get deeper into that as we go into the work that we've done. But that's going to be a point of discussion. Then installing security measures, basically beefing up the fence, securing that, isolate the electrical feeds. Leaving the stacks will obviously require some ongoing O&M for the plant in order to maintain the FAA hazard lighting on the stacks. And then option number 2, basically same as option number 1, but taking down the stacks. Obviously that is going to be a challenge to do that just with the proximity of the stacks. And it would require a very controlled demolition process to remove those. And then option number 3, obviously the highest cost, highest effort, basically closing the pond still, but that would include asbestos removal, demolishing the facilities, taking it down to ground level, and restoring the site for potential future use. But as I've said, it's not required by regulation. Burns & McDonnell, obviously, they've got a lot of experience with doing decommissioning. In their efforts, they've determined that about $7,800 per megawatt for the facility is a rough estimate for the cost of decommissioning. We provided them a lot of the historic information from OMU, did a review of the engineering drawings with them, took them on tours of the facility. They looked at their estimates based on current market pricing as well as local labor rates, equipment costs, potential salvage pricing. And there's what Burns & McDonnell came up with as far as their estimates go. The 3 options: retire in place without the stack removal is estimated about $13.4 million. Taking down the stacks would add about $8 million to that. And then the full demolition would ultimately be about $36.9 million. And that would be less the $8 million for scrap value that they estimated on 2018 dollars. So really, you're looking at about $44.9 million. And then taking that $8 million in scrap value. So looking at what they put together, reviewing their study, we concluded that it'd be prudent for us to enhance the Burns & Mac study using OMU personnel, using our expertise, our experience of the plant and the facilities, and try to enhance their study a bit and come up with some better cost for what we think it would actually be. Put together a team consisting of myself. Russ Evans is here today. Alex Don is here today as well. Daryl Chin, Jim Roberts helped on that, and then we got delivery support from Scott Minch, Austin McLemore, and Jody Gaddis. Talked about the asbestos. One of the biggest differences you're going to see in our study versus our enhancement of the Burns & Mac study is around the asbestos piece of it. Asbestos encapsulation, we've toured a couple of facilities that are in the process of decommissioning. One of the biggest things that we hear from those folks is encapsulation of asbestos is really a temporary measure at best, that once the facility deteriorates, weather gets in, that the encapsulation breaks down and the problem becomes bigger and quicker and still. So the encapsulation would really just kick the cost of mitigation down the road. And obviously taking it out in the beginning would prevent any of that. And we believe would be the lowest cost long-term option.
How much asbestos is there? Is there a lot in there since it's such an old plant?
Both units were built with using heavily the asbestos insulation. We have through the years, as we've done piping work, as we've done boiler work, we have mitigated areas that we've come into contact with. But at the end of the day, there is still a large amount of asbestos in the plant. We've had one of our contractors do a survey for us, primarily of the piping insulation, the boiler insulation. And so we've got what we believe to be a pretty accurate budgetary number for what it would cost to actually abate the asbestos.
If you demolish the whole building with all the asbestos in it, do you have to encapsulate it first? Or can you just?
You'd have to remove it first
You have
before,
to remove it first
and that was
before you-
one of the plants that we had gone to visit. That's what they were actually, had delayed their process of decommissioning because they did have to go in initially to remove all the asbestos. And obviously you've got limited access to those areas while it's being abated.
It's a lot easier to remove in place than to let it deteriorate, and then now you've got it potentially unencapsulated and spread out. It expands your cost because now you've got a much more difficult asbestos abatement. So, but in any case, before any demolition is done, the asbestos has to come out. You can't demolish in place and leave the asbestos in
Yeah,
place.
you can't encapsulate it and then.
No, so you'll have an asbestos abatement crew in there before you start the first demolition activity.
And if you look at Elmer Smith, some of the asbestos insulation that we have is actually inside the boiler building, but there's a large part of it too that's actually external to the building, which would create its own set of issues.
Thank you.
So as we began to enhance the Burns and Mack study, we divided the plant or the facility into basically 11 areas that we could focus on individually and independently, and look at the isolation, look at the cost for some of the basic decommissioning work that needs to be done. And so there's a breakdown of the areas that we looked at. Then we identified the structures that could possibly have some use post decommissioning. We've looked at separating the switch yard and relay building, which OMU will own probably forever. The ESS warehouse area that could have potential use in water production, seeing as its close proximity to the cabin plant, as well as the stack lighting that we talked about a while ago. We've created a detailed schedule, including the resources. We've talked in the past about using OMU resources as long as we could to try to save some of the cost as far as using contractors and what, as well as continuing to utilize our workforce. We've estimated fixed costs for non-production labor expenses, and we've also generated manpower curves as far as the timeline as to how long we think we would keep internal resources busy during these activities. The initial decommissioning activities will be performed by ESS personnel. We'll do a lot of plant cleanup. We'll be draining the lubricants from all the equipment, removing tools, spare parts, reusable materials, draining chemicals, process storage tanks. We're doing a lot of the work right now with Alex and what archiving is necessary, plant documentation. So we'll use those folks to help with that. Securing access to the buildings to prevent unauthorized access, as well as co-pile remediation and area grading. So that's a lot of the activities that we'll be using OMU personnel to perform. Here's the manpower curve. And we'll present this to the plant this afternoon as well. This is strictly a projected manpower curve, an estimate of where we will be. You can see when we shut down here in June, we'll be up around 71, 72 people dedicated to Elmer Smith Station, and then how those numbers drop off. Again, don't get too caught up on the specific numbers for each area there, because as we get near that time, as activities are going on, those numbers may fluctuate slightly, but we think that that's going to be a fairly decent projection as to where we will be and how we will idle it down, all the way out through June of 21. So for the first year after Unit 2 shuts down, that's where we see the manpower being relative. So in our enhancement, we've come up with these project estimates. Option number one, retire in place without, and leaving the stacks in place, 16.9 million. You'll notice the Burns and Mac was about 13 million in that. The biggest difference, as we talked about, being the asbestos encapsulation versus the asbestos abatement.
Did they come up with a number for removal of the stack? Was that Burns McDonald came up with that number?
We've actually talked to some contractors and feel that we've got a pretty good estimate as from their experience as to what it would take to remove the 2 stacks there.
How much was removal and how much was it for getting rid of the material?
I don't remember that breakdown. Rusty, you,
Which one are you talking about?
the
For
stacks?
stack removal, how much of that cost was for disposal of the material?
They didn't break it down that far, they just gave us a lump sum.
One of the things, as we talk about next steps in a few minutes, one of the things we'll be looking at is, on that stack removal, is timing. We don't have to do it now, stacks are still in good shape. What timing works best for us when we do the financial analysis? Should we spread those costs out? As well as, are there options to enhance that number? You know, we may look at, since the stack is concrete and rebar mostly, can we dispose of that on site? I think that's a long shot, but that would save us some costs. So we'll be talking to the regulatory folks about, can we create basically a small construction demolition debris landfill on site just for on-site material? Again, concrete's relatively benign. So we'll be looking at, can we enhance that $5 million number, but that's, those are some of the next step items we'll be working on.
And I guess if you took the stack down, there'd be some amount of asbestos removal anyway, wouldn't there? And there's some stuff that ties into that stack.
There's very little, there may be some pipe, but most of this, when you get out the asbestos is for the real high, 1,000-degree plus temperature. Stacks were in the 300-degree range, so that's gonna be mineral wool and other more typical insulations. I'm not seeing a lot of asbestos in the stack itself.
So as Tony as we talked about, the second option, retire in place with the stack removal, would add about 21.9, or add about $5 million to that for the stack removal. And then full demolition again would be 49 less the 8, so we're estimated about 41 million. And again, that 8 million is dependent on scrap prices, scrap values at the time of demolition. Option number one, again, is a low-cost option. That includes closing the ash ponds, clean closing as we refer to it, removing the asbestos from plant site, not having to worry about the encapsulation, just kicking that can down the road, so go ahead and take care of that. We would have to maintain the stack lighting, as well as access to the stacks for periodic inspections. We do believe that this would be a viable option for OMU.
Brad, how much do you estimate that'll cost to maintain that lighting?
We've got in the budget right now, Paul, about $75,000 a year to maintain the stack inspection, stack lighting, and to stay on top of that. And that, obviously that's just for the inspections. There's nothing in there for repairs or anything like that. So, and there's a breakdown of 11 areas that we talked about a while ago. The cost for each one of those, ash pond, coal pile closures, $8 million of that. Which we would have to do. The asbestos removal is 3.7 of that. So those two right there, by and large, are the lion's share of that $16 million cost, 16.9. Any questions on that?
We do have, as you see down at the bottom, a 10% contingency
Correct.
added to this as well.
Of course, the big item on there is your ash pond removal. Where does that go? When you remove those, where do you remove them to?
We take some of it to the Davis County landfill. We've got an agreement with them to take some of it. We try obviously to find other avenues for it. We're doing a lot of backhauling to Peabody for them to use as roads or whatever in their mining operations. So that's really our largest source of backhauling to Peabody right now is where the bulk of it's going.
So those are both permitted and acceptable ways to dispose of ash from these facilities. So when we look forward, we're looking at splitting that and between those two avenues of disposal. But none of it will stay on our site. And that includes, we talk about CCR, obviously that includes the ash in the ash ponds, but also includes any leftover gypsum that we have that we can't sell. Right now, all of our gypsum is going to USG, so we have very little disposable gypsum. There's some off-spec, small amount that will be included in that, but it's primarily ash.
Of course, it depends on Peabody staying in business too, I guess, doesn't it?
Well,
All things-
we think that the mine they're hauling to, which we've been using, will still be an active mine site. And that's the key. The regulations permit us to do it, to backhaul to an active mine site. So if they were to close, then we'd have to reconfigure and go all to the permitted landfill.
So option number 2, again, same as option number 1, just the difference being the inclusion of stack removal. As Kevin said a while ago, it doesn't have to be in conjunction with the initial decommissioning activities. The stack removal can stand alone and can be moved out to a later date if needed. But the estimate's the same. You can see the stack removal there is 4.5 along with the 10% contingency. So that's the increase in the $5 million between option 1 and option 2. Option 3, $41 million, full demolition, taking it down to ground level and preparing it for potential future use. The limitations there is obviously we will have to maintain the switch yard, which will remain OMU property, as well as the water production facilities. And we'll take a look at the full footprint here in a minute and kind of lay that out. There's the additional cost for those. Notice the contingency goes up because of more uncertainty in that project. So our recommendation for the Elmer Smith station would be to go with option number 2, to retire in place, removing the stacks and removing the asbestos. That would eliminate the O&M for maintaining the FAA hazard lightings, mitigates any risk of future issues with the stacks, as well as any issues with the asbestos. We believe that this is the best balance of risk versus cost, and obviously if at some later date, if full demolition were to be desired, then it could be done down the road. Any questions, thoughts on that before we move on? So we've got projected milestones. Again, these are projections based on the plant shutting down on May 31st of 2020. We will begin doing some of the Unit 1 decommissioning activities. That's why it's showing a much sooner date than once Unit 2 finishes on May 31st. Then we'll start Unit 2 decommissioning activities. All the way down into stack demolition if we decided to do that in conjunction with the other activities. Would take us out through June of 2021, and we would consider the process complete at that time. There's a layout of the full Elmer Smith site. Got identified here the switch yard, the delivery obviously will maintain. Here's the barge loadout facility and access on this side of the plant. This area up in here, the warehouse sits here, so this is where we're talking about maintaining for water facilities, as well as if there were any potential option of building generation down the road, then that area up there at the top would probably be the footprint for that. So basically, this area right out here in front, we've got the old crown tank as well as the new crown tank that's being built. We've got several wells in this area, so we would have to maintain that area for OMU property as well, which would really limit any road frontage, and really your only sellable, only area then would be right back in here that would have any value or any option for that. So the next steps, we will evaluate scheduling alternatives and financial impact. As I said a while ago, we'll look at where the stack demolition falls into that. If need be, then we'll push that on out a little bit. But we think that obviously the clean closing the ponds, asbestos removal, and those things need to be done as soon as we shut the plant down. And then we'll come back to you guys with a final recommendation and financial forecast during the fiscal 21 budgeting process.
Now, I appreciate your position on the asbestos removal. Every project I've been involved in that we've encapsulated, we always came to conclude it down the road.
We've heard some horror stories, definitely.
Yeah, it's a temporary measure, as Brad says, kicking the can down the road at best.
Because of the proximity of this plant to the cabin water plant, when you start demolishing everything, maybe collapsing the stacks or whatever, is that going to geologically affect any of our piping, any of our, all the work we've done over there because of its proximity?
Shouldn't. You know, both of the stacks, the new stack is here for the FGD, the old stack is here. So you can see cabin plant being up here. So the biggest impact is just really gonna be on structures that are pertaining to Elmer Smith Station only. We don't foresee any impact there. Obviously, you know, there is, the risk would, one of the bigger risks would be you've got a 650-foot stack here. If it were for some reason to fall forward, then we could very seriously jeopardize the switch yard pretty quickly. So those are some of the issues that we'd have to work around. And around this one, you've got the full FGD structure, the absorber vessels in there, but obviously we'll clean those out and remove all the material from those as well.
How do you take the stacks down? Do you take
I was
them down
gonna,
like?
one of the things that, as they did the study that we looked at, you know, you see these videos all the time, these power plants where they demolish the stack and basically just topple it over and then go and clean it up. We can't do that because of the proximity to the switch yard, other structures that we may want to reuse. So we're gonna have to do a more controlled demolition. In '92, we took down the existing, the Unit 1 stack was 350 feet tall. And what they did, they started at the top and basically cut it into big chunks, pushed the chunks down, and kind of gnawed it down from the top, if you will. That's probably similar to what they do here. They'd have to do a controlled demolition so we don't jeopardize. Obviously, the switch yard is the main thing. We cannot do without switch yard. But, you know, we're just, the fall radius of those stacks, I guess, is pretty significant, so.
You'd probably be a free engineering service for Ted Bobby, because he loves that kind of stuff.
Just he'd do it just for fun. It would've been a lot cheaper if we could've just toppled them, but.
And keep in mind too that that switch yard, that's our connection to the grid. That's our lifeline, if you will.
And that's another issue, you know, we've had a lot of questions, you know, people talk about, you know, shutting the plant down. They're envisioning this large site that could be used for redevelopment. We're gonna be in that switch yard as long as we're providing power to the city. That's not going away, the Crom tank. So really, when you look at the future of this for other options, there's just not a lot there because we have so much of it that we need to maintain for ongoing OMU operations. So, you know, it's about 165 acre sites, but there's probably less than a third of that that's actually going to be emptied out when we're done if we did the full demolition.
And that's the primary switch yard that the power will come through from?
Yes.
Yes.
From big
That's where
rivers.
we're building our new interconnection into. And I don't think moving that switch yard is not technically or regulatorily feasible.
But you don't collapse the stacks like they collapsed the executive end, and you don't.
No, I don't think we don't want to take the risk that somebody might have put the charge in the wrong spot.
All right, so we also wanted to take a stab at, with cabin expansion ongoing and on track and everything going well there, while we were looking at decommissioning, we wanted to also take a stab at the Plant A area as well, since it does, the old power plant is there as well. So this part of the presentation will be a lot briefer than the first part. But we estimate that, you know, obviously the decommissioning Plant A will not begin any earlier than the fall of 2021. That would be after the cabin expansion project is complete. It's fully commissioned and online. We did obtain a quote from a local contractor for an estimated cost on the demolition of the Plant A site. And you know, obviously those costs would have to be split between power and water production as we get into that. One of the biggest limiting factors is that on the Plant A site, we've got about 7.1 million gallons a day of raw water capacity in the wells that are there. We would have to maintain that water capacity somehow, either on the property itself or look at moving or adding another well field somewhere, which we believe would be cost prohibitive, and it would be advantageous to hold on to that. 7.1 million gallons. To kind of put in perspective, we've got about 27 million gallons total capacity right now, so that, losing that would take us down to about 20 million total. So that would be a significant hit to our water supply. Retire and place option for Plan A would be about $300,000, includes crushing, leveling the basins, again, the perimeter fencing, and emptying and securing the buildings. Full demolition, estimated in 2021 dollars, would be about 8.2 million, broken down between the power production costs, the plant one power plant, and then the water production costs.
How much of that cost is abatement?
Do what?
How much of that cost is abatement? You know,
They built it into their number, I don't know if they're exactly.
I think their quote has it broken down, I don't remember what.
It
the
does,
number was.
but, you know, there's, yeah, it has it in there, but they didn't break it out specifically. And then as we talked about, to maintain that 7.1 million gallon per day water capacity, we estimate that it would cost about 16 million to develop a new well field, and the infrastructure required for that. So therefore, our recommendation as we look out ahead at the cabinet completion and commission would be to retire Plan A in place and then maintain that property for the foreseeable future for the well capacity. Any questions? Thank you, guys.
You see some of these plants, like there's one, I think, on the Ohio River as you go across from New Albany, Indiana, and Louisville. It still has the stacks, and the whole plant looks like it's still there. Is that, why did they decide to do that versus?
There are all kinds of different plans, different utilities taken. Many of them have taken the retire in place and do as little as we can, which is the least cost option, and that's a Duke Energy plant. They have if you go to their website, I think it's still up, they have a detailed explanation of how they chose different decommissioning options. If it's in a sensitive area, they will take the whole plant down. Some of the plants they're doing what we've recommended, stacks and minimal decommissioning. Some they're leaving up. It just depends. But there are a lot of coal-fired plants around the country are just going to sit there basically looking like they did, except they locked the gates and cleaned up what they had to clean up. Yeah. So it's all over the board. They can recover, Duke Energy can recover all of their decommissioning costs through rates if they get their PSCs or PUCs to approve it. So that's one of the things that they look at as well. So, yeah, it's across the board.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to ask about is that I'm sure a lot of people are going to, those are pretty big numbers. Does that mean that everybody's electric rate's going to go up? But you basically built this in, haven't you? To
Fortunately for us, we have the facilities fund is what, $8.3 million, which that's going to cover what we have to do, which is the ash pond and if we look at it that way, it matches the ash pond and coal pile. And then I think we have enough reserves where we can do the recommended option without impacting rates. So we're not planning, we don't believe this will have an impact on our rate forecast that we provided in our plan moving forward.
Let's be luxury of not having the timeline, so we can do a little year till we.
Exactly. We can spread this out. That's one of the analysis that we'll be doing. We got the technical folks. We'll get banks and accounting and be looking at that between now and when we bring this back for here's what we want to do and here's how we're going to do it in the budget. That's what's the best way to do it to minimize the financial impact. And there's several options that we've looked at, different ways that it can be handled. So
you say $1 million just on the environmental costs for maintaining a plant, so keeping a plant active.
right. That's one of the reasons why we're shutting it down, is to save those costs.
We'll make sure we don't borrow money to do this.
Yeah, that's not in the plan. Do you want anything else on that?
You've got the reserves, you've got 40 million in electric general fund after the city put it in, and after the 2 months requirement, and then you've got like 34 million in reserves contingency, which will drop down to 19 after we do this bond issue next month.
Yeah, and we don't need much reserve once it's sold.
So I think we're in good shape. It's a matter of finding the best way to how we move forward, both from a physically doing the work and how it hits the impacts the books.
Good job, Brad. Appreciate
Thank
you
you.
continuing with that.
Yeah.
It's a good team effort.
Yeah, we spent a lot, they've spent a lot of time, when I say we, I haven't spent much time on it. They've spent a lot of time on it, and I think it's really the best, option that we've got moving forward. We've got no one. And we talked to other folks who are doing this, have been through it, and have done it different ways, looked at a lot of research. Burns McDonald, we started with them, a lot of the work in the power consulting business now is shutting down power plants, and they've done a lot of this. So they've got a lot of experience. That was a good starting point. And then we took, as you saw, they took their knowledge of the plant and then moved forward with it. So feel pretty good about where we are. I don't like the big numbers, but
And honestly, our efforts, we tried to do them somewhat independently of the dollars that Burns and Mack had estimated, and then kind of look back after the fact to do just kind of a sanity check, and we felt that, looking at the differences between the two, that our numbers correlated pretty well with what they had given us.
And I would be surprised in the near future with as much coal generation shutting down, that there will be some requirements down the road.
I wouldn't be surprised. I think you can see some of your more progressive states, Northeast, some of those, they're looking at rules and regulations. Some of the local, Duke Energy, for example, some of the, depending on where a plant is, there's some local pressures to, hey, it's an eyesore or it's near a national park, we want that down. That drives some of their decisions on whether they do full demolition. For us, it's really balancing, as Brad put it well, risk mitigation versus the cost moving forward. Before we go to, we need to have a brief closed session. Before we get there, some recent developments on our bond refunding. We've gotten good news from both rating agencies. We maintained our ratings from both agencies. There's copies of their press releases on that, so we were very pleased with that. We've done a lot of work, both Lynn's team and our consultants, to get to this point. As you all know, you saw the first iterations of our plan and our forecast. I'll give you one too. And moving forward, so and we had to explain that to folks outside and get them up to speed. So a lot of effort was put into that. We're very pleased that both agencies maintained our credit ratings at the level they were with stable outlooks. So I think we are in good shape as we go toward tomorrow night. We'll get approval from the City Commission, and I guess we're still on schedule for November 20th.
How much in rate would make a difference if we drop down to a B rate or B plus? What would be the difference in the rate?
I don't have an exact
Idea?
number, but.
We didn't have an estimate that, but it obviously would have had some impact.
To a B would be significant for us.
How much?
Dropping to a B would be significant.
Well, they were looking at dropping maybe stable to negative outlook, and that would be a little, but not.
But to a B, like you said,
So that was good news. So unless there's anything else, I think we're ready to go into closed session. To discuss personnel matters pursuant to KRS 61-810-1F, pending litigation pursuant to KRS 61-810-1C, and matters which are required to be discussed in privacy pursuant to KRS 61-810-1K, including but not limited to KRS 61-878-1CI and KRS 61-872-6.
End of OMU Commission work session for the 4th of November 2019.
See ya. My computer just died.